nothing wrong with you. You just were never told the truth. Your body is sending false hunger signals. Sometimes just a thought or a feeling can become the trigger for the routine of eating.
So I'm excited to have a conversation with you about what people are getting wrong when it comes to weight loss. And one argument that I've heard you make is that weight loss isn't really about food.
Yeah. Funny, right?
Yeah.
Counterintuitive,
Quite.
counter to the entire market of weight loss is that it would be actually all about the food, and that this market should be able to tell you, hey, if you just eat this, you'll be fine. I personally lost 65 pounds. I've been keeping those off for over 10 years.
Wow.
And I was that consumer, right? Who just believed, okay, there's going to be this magic food plan, or if I only did this, I would be okay. But I was always then eating things that I didn't enjoy, I didn't like, and there was no longevity there. So eventually I would fall away from that food plan back into my old behaviors and habits. So, after years in the weight loss industry, years in behavior modification research, and years working with clients to lose weight, I really realized that it was never, ever that I worked with somebody who said to me, oh, I don't know what I should be eating. Like, they could literally lay out a day of perfect meals for me. Oh, I should probably have a yogurt and a berries for breakfast. I should probably have some salad and some chicken for, they could give me a perfect meal plan. But what they couldn't do was tell me what behaviors were standing in the way of them actually making sustainable change. So knowing what to eat for breakfast is fine, but if you don't get up on time, if you consistently get up too late, if you consistently don't prepare, right? If you consistently, stay up too late, if you consistently eat after dinner, these are behaviors that lead to weight gain over time. And so it was never the knowledge around, or that they couldn't Google search what's the perfect meal plan. I mean, that's simple. The real work in weight loss is in examining your habit loops and the behavior patterns and your environment to discover what's triggering you to go through these loops of unhealthy behavior, then dismantling them literally one at a time. So it's a totally different process than people actually have been led to believe.
I love that. I mean, because ultimately weight loss, what it takes to achieve weight loss can be boiled down to a very simple mathematical truth, right? Like create a sustainable calorie deficit for yourself. And I feel like everybody kind of knows that.
Yeah.
So if everybody knows that, how come we're walking around in a time where 2/3 of American adults are either overweight or obese?
Yeah. And they actually believe that by 2030, right, that's going to be critical, like 90% of our country will be. And I think the secrets around what the truth is around our environment at this point, and understanding a little bit more about your brain and how your brain works and drives you towards eating and overeating, and then understanding that we have a food environment and food manufacturers who have been studying you and your brain for many, many years behind the scenes. They pay, scientists millions of dollars to understand what will get you to not be able to say no, to trigger you to eat, and then to trigger you to not be able to stop eating. So I think once I illuminate that for people and they start to realize there's nothing wrong with them, that's like one of my famous taglines. There's like nothing wrong with you. You just were never told the truth. You're being bounced like a ping pong ball all around by triggers in your environment and the way that people want you to behave. And once you start to notice, oh my gosh, wow, I am programmed to eat. Every time I see food, smell food, or even talk about food, we're programmed to want to eat food. That's just how we're wired. Your brain is wired that way to make you survive because we didn't have enough food at certain points in our development. So now we're in an environment where we see food, smell food, talk about food, watch food TV, have pantries, live in the Zoom world where I can go downstairs and eat in 30 seconds. I can have food in my hand, and I'm bored, and I'm in the same environment. So once you realize those triggers and that the hunger that you think you're experiencing is physiological, you will actually think you're hungry. You will have your mouth water. You might even have your stomach grumble, but you only ate like 10 minutes ago. Your body is sending false hunger signals. So learning that those triggers are occurring, that you can manage them, and seeing, oh my God, it's because I came downstairs and saw my kid eating a peanut butter and jelly that I then said, oh, I want to get a peanut butter and jelly.
Wow. Well, at this point, you've made it to the top of the mountain. You've achieved the holy grail of sustainable weight loss. You've worked with many, many, many clients over the years. You've written, a number of great books, including Target 100. But tell me about your own journey, your own personal journey. As I understand it, you've had your own experience with yo-yo dieting and the like. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what I always want people to know when they listen to me. I'm coming from a place of truly understanding what you're feeling. I was an overweight child. I was in a diet program by the time I was 12. And I think what that does, is it sets you up for feeling like you're not good enough, right? Basically, something is wrong with you, and the whole world kind of tells you that this is something that should be simple. You should just eat less, like, and move more, right? So I think that set me up for a lot of sort of feeling like I was constantly chasing a better version of myself. So that sent me through this sort of diet spiral. I did, several diets. I lost 30 pounds, maybe 5 times. It escalated to 50, then it escalated to 65, just the way that we see this happening for people all over the world now, which is once they get into that diet mentality and the diet culture, that there is no reversal. It's a spiraling up. Each weight gain is more and more and more. So I lived that, and really experienced that, the pain, the emotional pain, the physical pain, and the guilt and shame that lives around carrying weight. So it's kind of become my life's work to illuminate, what's really happening for you, instead of like what's wrong with you and why can't you do this. But that there are real physiological things going on. There's real brain science that you can leverage to put this in your favor. So I think that's sort of at least a little history. I then, I was an actress actually for many years.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, so as a professional actress, I have a master's degree in opera. I was in big Broadway musicals like Les Miserables. That just exacerbated, right, the diet mentality of being an actress and needing to look a certain way. When I finally left there, I went to Weight Watchers to lose the weight. I was just a customer there, ended up working my way all the way up through the ranks to executive level, where I was the celebrity weight loss coach for people like Jennifer Hudson and Jessica Simpson and Charles Barkley, Katie Couric, Al Roker, just really helping high level folks. That gave me a lot of exposure. But I never stopped leading the meetings on the ground level of Weight Watchers. So I was always helping everyday people. I was always working at weight loss myself. So I felt like I really was getting that insight. I stayed there for about 11 years. And then I started my own company and have been working in every single place that I could, that was an offshoot of the entire wellness sphere in my mind, but specifically in technology, because I really believe in the power of technology and science to change the course of what's going on right now. So I've then written Target 100, and am now developing a brand new platform and way of thinking about weight loss.
I love that. I think, you've had the privilege of getting to work with some pretty household names. I think what separates them from average people is that the people that A-list or A-list celebrities, they're highly motivated because their livelihood depends on them getting in a certain shape. But average, we'll just, use the term average people who are not, or civilians who are not working in Hollywood, who are not singers, actors, they don't necessarily have that kind of motivation. And I think that it makes things much more difficult for them at the end of the day. And that's where I think motivation is like, where motivation, motivation, inspiration, people who rely on motivation, inspiration, I think it's almost setting yourself up for failure. You have to kind of bring discipline, I think, into the equation. Would you say that's an accurate statement?
I love that. I like that we're talking about motivation, because motivation is like this mystery term, and people think like, oh, they're going to wait around for it. It's just going to magically appear. Or like, remember that time when I was so motivated? Why can't I get that back? Like, it's like something that's going to drop in on them. Right. And why can they not control it? I totally, I try to reframe motivation for people, and really teach them that sustainable weight loss is about identifying behavior shifts and identifying what behavior shifts am I working on right now. Right. So maybe there are 3 small things you're working on. Like, I'm going to put my gym clothes out at night so that when I wake up, they're there. And that helps me. Because you're not going to wake up and just be motivated to go to the gym. Like, people think that that's what it's going to feel like. And I train people that know habit formation is a series of triggering a routine, understanding what the reward is from that routine, and also understanding that it doesn't feel good to change a habit. No one talks about that. Like getting up and deciding I'm going to create a gym routine. It's not, you feel uncomfortable. You don't want to do it. You're getting up early, but if you get up early, put the shoes on, walk out the door, go to the gym, the first week's terrible. The second week's less terrible. Third week, all of a sudden, it's like your brain is going, this is what we do. And it becomes your go-to rote behavior over time until you can't not do it. Where I think people fail is thinking that it's going to feel good and that they're just going to become motivated because they're so angry or dissatisfied with the way that they feel in their lives that it's going to magically appear. It does not. It's just like work. You don't go into work and a project just gets done. You break it down into tiny shifts, right? Tiny steps, and you go and you move that ball down the field. And then eventually you get that project to a place where it is rolling and it gets completed. So I don't want people to live in a space of this magical mystery motivation anymore.
Yeah, I think you so eloquently described the conundrum with inertia, right? Like an object in motion wants to stay in motion.
Yes.
An object at rest wants to stay at rest.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we also have evolution fighting against us.
Yes.
In the sense that, we're not really inclined to want to exercise. We're inclined, I think, more accurately to want to conserve energy. And then, of course, to reproduce, to procure food, and the like. But exercising is something that goes against millennia of evolution. So how do we create healthier habits for ourselves?
Well, I think that everyone, just like I said, everybody, when I talk to them and say, like, name what you should eat, when I ask that question, tell me 3 small behaviors that are standing in the way of your weight loss. And they will immediately pop into, well, I'm basically, while I'm making the kids dinner, I'm eating a full dinner while I'm getting the dinner ready. Or, oh, I'm eating after dinner. Or I skip breakfast and then I get overly hungry and I overeat at lunch. I mean, they are clear as a bell. So I feel like if anyone's listening to this, jot down 3 small things that you personally know, like wandering downstairs at 4:00 when I'm tired and going to the pantry and foraging through and eating chocolate and then it, spiraling into the chips, whatever it is, jot them down. Then examine, what could I do to change that? What could I do to trigger a new behavior? And I ask people to get their own attention. Because what a lot of people don't understand is that once you create a habit, it moves to a back portion of your brain where you're really not conscious that you're doing it. So halfway through being in the pantry, you're like, oh, darn myself, why did I do this? You weren't even there for the whole trip down the stairs, you're kind of like thinking about work, or you're thinking about whatever's happening in your day. And then all of a sudden you get there, you start eating, and you don't wake up until it's halfway over. So I'll say to someone, you know what, close the door to your pantry, put a giant post-it note, a big bright pink post-it note that says no snacking today. Because if you don't trigger, if you don't stop the loop, it's like being on the road and driving somewhere and getting there because you've driven there so many times. You go, oh, how did I even get here? I wasn't even present for that. So I really encourage people to begin to think, how can I either, trigger myself not to do something or trigger myself to do something, creating a new routine. And you'll get down there and your whole brain and your whole body will be like, no, but it is 4 o'clock. I need a snack. I'm tired. I'm hungry. I'm this. And it's going to be highly uncomfortable. And that's when you need to learn to sort of really push into the new routine, right? Put the gym clothes on, go. I don't care if you go to the gym for 5 minutes, because what you're doing is creating the routine of putting the clothes on, walking out the door and getting there. And then, same thing with the 4 o'clock snack. I don't care if the biggest win for you was that you got down there, you walked outside, you took 5 deep breaths, but you couldn't get past it. You still wanted the snack, but you're going to say that for the first week, that's all I'm capable of. And next week, I'm going to walk out the door 5 steps and around the block and divert and continue to divert and divert and divert until your body no longer tells you, the brain no longer says at 4 o'clock, it doesn't put you in the loop where you're totally unconscious to go downstairs and do this. So I hope I'm being super clear that you've got to have a trigger, then you have to follow through, even though there is discomfort. Understand that if you're uncomfortable, you're doing it right. That's the part.
So well put. I think one of the major reasons why people, or I'll just speak for myself, I tend to want to snack either when I'm bored or when I've had a stressful stimulus that sends me to the kitchen looking for a quick dopamine hit. So, in lieu of the snack, what can people do to satisfy either or both of those two motivators?
Yeah, and you're expressing something that is so important for people to understand, right? So I talked about physical cues, right? You could see food and want to eat it. There are other triggers. You just named some. Some people call it emotional eating. I don't love that term because it makes it sound like you were crying in a corner and like you were emotionally having food. But what you clearly stated was there is a payoff. When you eat food, there is a dopamine, serotonin release that takes place. So you've made quite a smart choice. You're feeling a negative feeling or even a positive one, because sometimes we do it in celebration mode. You've then figured out a routine that makes that negative feeling go away, which is your reward. So when sometimes just a thought or a feeling can become the trigger for the routine of eating. So I think where you also were very clear is what could I divert with, right? So I said that, or what could I insert since this routine isn't working for me? This routine is making me gain weight. What routine could I do? Personally, I can say I struggled during the pandemic because I had a very active job in and out of the city, carrying a book bag up and down stairs of New York City, running all over the place, traveling. And now I'm sitting in this room, and sitting here and not moving made the stress higher. And I'd go downstairs and I would either overeat or have a cocktail to take the temperature down. And it became a loop. And so, I realize, right, I see those loops. So I need people to understand and see themselves. There's nothing wrong with you. I'm not a bad person. I just created a really smart loop that was relieving my stress. Then I said, that's not going to work for me long term to stay in this loop. And I created the loop of put the leash on the dog and step outside and walk around do a 20-minute walk. So that's an example. Each of us has to discover what it is that will quell the feeling that we're trying to run from, right? So if it's boredom, maybe that is, okay, I'm going to call a friend. If that is, stress and anxiety, maybe that is, I'm going to get outside and take 5 deep breaths, or I'm going to stretch for 5 minutes, or whatever that is. So it's about identifying.
All super helpful. I've heard you talk in the past about the value of hydration to sustainable weight loss. Talk to me about that. Oh, there you go. Drinking.
Cheers.
What is it? What's in the cup?
Just plain water all day
Nice.
long. Yeah. Yeah. I always say hydration is my superpower. We are made up of water, right? So in average, we're about 68% water, but our really important, like brain and heart and the things that really run our metabolism are over 75% water. So when you're dehydrated, I mean, a few things happen. Usually you actually crave food. Because if you think about it, if you think back to how we survived when we couldn't find a water source, we found food like leaves and plants and berries that had water in them. So we tend to feel hungry when we're actually thirsty. And when people don't understand the habit of staying hydrated throughout the day, they end up kind of mistaking those two. Also, your whole metabolic system, your whole system runs on water. So without it, you really begin to see a reduction in metabolism. So it is a boost, and you will find that energy and mood and the way your skin looks and all of these things, because you're made of water, it just sort of brings you into this space of just being able to handle stress better, sleeping better, like all of that stuff that might have made you eat now is reduced by X%.
Wow. What are some other acceptable ways of hydrating for people who, maybe get bored of water? Is sparkling water a good
Yeah.
sort of second option?
Wonderful. I always say in my book, I ask people to aim for 100 ounces of water in a day, which I think like people think that's a lot. It's really actually not that much when you start looking at it. I tell people like you can count some of your coffee for that. You can count some sparkling water or tea because there's water in there. I try to get people to go about 70 to 75% true water, and then, sprinkle in those other drinks that will bring you a little joy in your life. But hydration is my favorite pillar in my book because it is the clearest example of habit formation. Is, you see me, I've got this bright yellow cup on my desk. I am so habitual, right? That I go downstairs, I get my little reading glasses, I pick up my computer, I get my notebook, and I fill my water. I'm not even present for that anymore and now it sits here and it triggers me all day, and it's sitting there and I see it. So I go, oh, drink it. Right. So it's a clear habit loop: trigger, routine, reward.
I love it. I love water. Drink it all the time. Also love sparkling water.
Yes, I love
I
it
love
too.
I love sparkling water with a little bit of, sometimes I buy a flavored sparkling water, like
Yeah.
orange flavored sparkling water, and I'll put some stevia drops in through the can
Yes.
hole, and it
Yes.
becomes, yeah, it's so good. It becomes like a calorie-free soda. It's almost better than soda because most sodas are too, even diet sodas they're too sweet.
So sweet. Well, now I've become the queen of a mocktail because like a little bit of kombucha, like a watermelon kombucha with seltzer, fresh limes, a few fresh raspberries thrown in there. And then, just really sitting with that in a wine glass was another way that I moved away from the need for a cocktail. Or if I was going to have one, it could spread those out. So I would have, my mocktail first, then maybe have a glass of wine, then I have a glass of water, then a glass of wine. So I'm so with you of like, there's so many fun ways to stay hydrated. So try to enjoy it.
Yeah, I love that. So a lot of people listening to this episode of the show probably are going to have come through the ringer of diet culture, having tried overly restrictive diet after overly restrictive diet. What do you make of those? What do you make of like the low carb, diet camp, the low fat diet camp, and where should people conceptualize situating themselves when it comes to, a sustainable weight loss pattern?
That's such a great question, and it actually hurts my heart to think about people going through that. And that was the purpose behind writing Target 100. Is I've been in the diet industry for over 20 years. I've worked behind the curtain in those in some of the largest companies in the world, and to know what I know now and to wish to share with people, weight loss does not have to hurt. It does not have to be this massive departure from where you are right now. In fact, what the first chapter in my book is, it says start with breakfast. I can see is like if people just say, I'm going to take a week and I'm going to focus on getting breakfast straight. I'm going to just outline 5 breakfasts that I like. Not that some other person outside of me, some RD who wrote this food plan with me not in mind. They don't know that I'm allergic to this and I'm, maybe, I'm from this culture and I eat these foods culturally. They don't know anything about you and they've just put this plan out there for you to sit down and go, you know what, I do. I love um, you know, uh, avocado toast. And I could do a slice of bread and a little bit of cheese and some avocado and an egg, or, oh, I love Greek yogurt, and write those down and work on just breakfast for a week of things you like. And then you're going to actually see weight loss. I sort of have another famous saying of, I always say, just give me a B. I think everyone thinks in weight loss, you have to be perfect. And if you make one error, then you have made a mistake and you are therefore you're out of the diet. So you go running back to your old habits and behaviors because you didn't stick perfectly to that. And my teaching is always like, it was never about the fact that you had one out of the pocket meal. It was about the fact that you felt bad about that. You got the guilt and shame spiral going, which then actually, when we look at the brain under an MRI, guilt and shame highlights the reward system. So we
Hmm.
go feeling guilt and shame about having the ice cream cone to actually just saying, well, I guess it's over. I'm just going to eat anything I want because I already messed it up. And I instead teach really what I call the art of recovery, right? The art of recovering from a perceived mistake. Because it wasn't. No one gained weight from an ice cream cone. They gained weight from turning that ice cream cone into a them being a bad person, which is all diet mentality, which is like the inability to be outside of black and white thinking. And I'm teaching gray zone, understanding that it's all about like saying, you know what, that's cool. I ate one ice cream cone. I didn't eat the whole carton and I enjoyed it. I was with my family. It was a beautiful summer day. I'm so grateful. I got a great breakfast plan for tomorrow morning. So it's so much more loving and easy and kind than the industry wants to make it out, because if they if they don't make it that way, then you believe you need them to understand your own success, and you don't. So my book is all about you writing your own weight loss program, which that's the one that sticks. When I'm eating the food I like, when I'm doing the exercise I like, when I'm actually understanding my behavior, not just trying to fit myself into some behavior that's been set on top of me, I can do that forever because it's mine. So it's a real juxtaposition of that diet industry and the control and the deprivation and the restriction that people have been made to believe they need to do. So, and being in the industry for this many years, like you asked about low carb and all this, I have seen it all. Literally, we went from carbs are bad to fats are bad to now, everything. And I don't even know what comes next. I don't know where we go after keto, right? Like just it's, whoa, but really figuring out and saying, okay, we just keep spiraling through this. How about if I spend time and really examine, for some people, eating a higher fat diet really makes them feel great and it's right for them. And people can spend the time and figure that out, that, wow, when I do have that eggs and cheese, maybe an omelet for breakfast, I really, God, I'm not hungry for a long time and I have a lot of energy. Whereas some people really thrive on a little higher carb breakfast. So playing around and figuring out what you respond to and not just putting a blanket over the top and jumping on that next fad diet, because some of them are even downright dangerous. So taking back the control, I think, is really important.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I definitely, I'm grateful that we have these different sort of diets out there that people can sort of like a buffet, like a Vegas
Yeah.
buffet, pick from,
Yes.
try out, right? Try it. If it doesn't work for you, you know that that's not the diet for you. But then at the other end of the spectrum, at least from my vantage point, I've come across a number of uh, health, quote unquote, health experts or diet experts on social media. Many of them actually RDs. That, I mean, the message from my vantage point may as well be eat whatever you want, just don't eat too much of it, which
Mm-hmm.
I don't think necessarily is all that helpful either. So where do you sit sort of in the in terms of when it comes to actually like the recommendations for what people should actually be eating other than, eat what you like?
Yeah. So, I mean, the pillar, the guideline that I give in Target 100 came after a lot of research and after a lot of thought, and after a lot of dieting myself. And I call myself a diet guinea pig. Every new diet that comes out, I gain 10 pounds, 10, 12 pounds, and then I use that diet, so that I understand what people are going through. So, I have a lot of diet experience, is what I'm saying. And I came up with a guideline of to aim for around 100 grams of carbs a day. So that is a very moderate amount of carbohydrates. You can have some, carbs with your breakfast. You could have a slice of toast. You could maybe have some rice with dinner. It's nothing crazy, but it, like you said, creates moderation.
Yeah.
And what we know to be true is that the packaged foods and the processed foods and sugar are what are killing you, not fats like we thought for so long. Like all of that has all been debunked. The eggs and the cholesterol coming from food sources, like all of that, we now know to be not real. So coming back into that space of going, okay, I'm going to find out around 100 grams of carbs. And I call it, my whole thing is ish, right? Because you may 110 grams of carbs, you're still losing weight, 120. Whereas the person sitting next to you, it might be 80. So this is a real experimentation. And it's really around not ever feeling like a failure. Right. So I think what happens to people like you have like a really healthy outlook on those diets. But for most people, as they go through a diet, they go in with this high expectation and hope that this is going to be the one that fixes me.
Hmm.
When it doesn't last, or they don't like it, or they don't, it's a crushing failure in their mind.
Hmm.
And I'm like you. And what I always counsel people on is like, that was a good experience. You should be really excited. You had that experience. Now you probably picked up 2 or 3 great meals from that. Like maybe you did find out that you love omelets and that you crafted a few. Let's put them in the basket of your weight loss program. And let's be grateful for every thing that we tried, because it gave us more information about what's right for you. So it's a different perspective. And I hope if people are listening, and they have felt that way, because I work with so many people and they express like, I can't fail again. And there is no failure, right? It was all effort. And you went in, there is another saying that every action has a positive intention. So every single action you take, even when it doesn't pan out the way you thought it, you actually went in with a positive intention. So giving yourself that credit that you didn't go in to cycle through yet another diet. You went in because you wanted to try. And I applaud people for trying without judgment. I just hope that they will not beat themselves up, if it doesn't really fit them, but take what you like and bring it along.
Couldn't agree more. I think part of the reason why people do tend to beat themselves up if they can't adhere to diet XYZ is that the purveyors of those diets tend to promote very black or white thinking about those diets. Like,
Yes.
you can only lose weight if you follow a strict ketogenic diet, which we know is not true. You don't have to do a ketogenic diet to lose fat. You don't have to do a low carb diet. People lose lots of weight on low fat diets.
Yeah.
So it's really about finding, I think, what works for you. And I like the 100 gram of carb heuristic because it's very moderate. It's very moderate, but it also skims off the top, I think, a large portion of what are typically empty calories in the context of the standard American diet. Your average American today eats what, like 300 grams of carbohydrates a day?
300 is very average right now. Yeah. And recommended 25 grams of sugar a day. Most people are eating hundreds, 200, like it's just unbelievable. So just even taking an eye, and that's why, Target 100 is all about this holistic vision of like, yeah, we can talk about the food pillar all day, and food is critical. So we started and I said, like, food, it's not about food, it is about behavior, but food is very critical, and I think it is the place for people to start, because what we know about weight loss is if you can start there to examine that, it's where it's where you're most comfortable, and then I kind of work you in these other pillars of hydration and movement, exercise, stress, and sleep. Because if you don't address those 6 things, it's not just about a food plan. You're not going to be successful if it's ruling your life. I mean, you gave a great example. We put food in on stress. If we don't learn to manage our stress without using food, we're going to eventually fall off of that food plan and go back to using food as our stress reliever, because it is the go-to habit and behavior that is running our lives. So I think it's really important to think about food, but also expand it out into this place of a more holistic view, so that when that food plan fails, that's why these 6 pillars, often people say to me, they're like, I really enjoy this plan because I have six opportunities for success. My food wasn't great today, but I took that 10,000 step walk in the afternoon and I win. And I went to bed on time and I drank my water. And sometimes those 3 pillars can give you as much weight loss as food. I start you with food because that's where you think you need to start. And because food can give you success off the bat, right? By changing a few things. What we know about weight loss is for you to see weight loss in the earliest stages of a weight loss program is where you begin to get real hooked on it, because you're like, oh, okay, I can do this. And it wasn't that bad. So that's why I often tell people focus on your food, because that's where you're comfortable and it'll give you some success. Then move on into these other pillars. And when I tell you, I have a worksheet that I'm sort of famous for called the wheel, and all 6 of them are laid out in a wheel in perfect symmetry, because in my mind, not a single one of them is less important. So it's not like food takes up 3/4 of the wheel and the others are squished into 1/4. If you aren't getting to bed on time, if you're not getting your recommended, you have a huge gap in your ghrelin and your leptin hormone that you're going to be starving all day. Your body and your brain, basically, they look at your brain and they're not sure if you actually smoked pot or if you just didn't get sleep, and you will have the munchies. So sleep is like so underrated in weight loss. So, I just want to open people's minds that, get out of that diet hole of it being about a food plan and you not having any control over this, and that it can be as simple as like getting in bed and going to sleep, which is like the greatest thing in the world for me. So
What would you say is one of the most important things, or the most important thing that people can do to optimize their sleep?
I really think it's about, oh, can I say a couple of them?
Yeah, please.
I
The more
got,
the merrier.
yeah, I think people overconsume caffeine
Hmm.
at this point. It's become very, acceptable to drink a lot of caffeine. I think people don't realize how that's disrupting them. I think thinking through that, I think, being hydrated is an excellent way to have your systems running and be more, aware. I think your sleep environment is critical. Having it be dark enough, be pleasant, removing screens from your sleep environment, but also just triggering, right? Triggering the routine and creating a routine around bedtime. I hear a lot of people, I mean, social media is making people suffer right now because they just get into this habit loop
Hmm.
of getting on there, and then they go or they get on Netflix or whatever it is. I think it's about really having those triggers that say, this is when I turn these things off and I move into a mode where I am going to let my body understand that we're moving into another phase of our day. Right now, it's just all sort of mushing together for people. So delineating this restful portion, I think, is really critical.
What do you say to somebody who's listening who just can't believe that it's the way that they sleep or the time that they get to bed has any bearing on their weight loss journey?
I'd say look at the science. I mean, what we know, as I say, so we will look at somebody's hormone levels when they sleep less, less than around 7 hours a night, right? So I'm going to always go back to the ish. Is that, some people are fine with 6.5, some people need 8, some people need 9. You got to do the work and figure out what your formula is for sleep. And then you got to, like, I protect mine with my life, because what we know from looking at your hormone levels of someone who's sleeping less than those 7 hours, your ghrelin hormone is actually elevated by 15%, and your leptin. So ghrelin makes you hungry. It makes you, we call it the go eat hormone. It makes you like think that it's time to eat. Your leptin is like the thermostat that says, oh, okay, we've had enough. Let's turn the machine off. So leptin decreases by 15%, ghrelin increases by 15. You've got a 30% hormone gap here of your go eat hormone, when like really pushing you all day. People think also when they're tired, sort of like we mistake hunger for, thirst for hunger. It's the same thing with sleep. We mistake food with giving us energy because we're tired. So I'm just going to eat something that'll give me energy. That's an energy source. And yeah, you're right. But it's not when you're chasing the ghrelin, which has made you hungrier by 15% all day.
That's insane. Yeah. And the magnitude, according to the latest research I've seen, is that it can actually make you consume about 400 calories more per day,
You're
which
exactly right.
if you're underslept every day of the week, that's almost a pound of fat gain
Yeah.
by the end of the week. And then you
And
stack that week after week after week. That's
it's
a spare tire.
there it is. Well, and
Yeah.
also you can't sleep and eat. Like, I'm all about that, right? I can't really sleep and eat. So if I just go to bed, like, I'm cutting out like an hour of eating time, you know?
Mhm.
So it's that kind of thought process around like, I can't exercise and eat really either. Right. So those are like a couple of really good, like barriers to taking in fewer calories. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I couldn't agree more. Do you have any feelings on intermittent fasting as a way of sort of extending out those borders, and sort of widening out that fasting window?
Yeah, I see it really, really working well for people, especially now in this new Zoom kind of new pandemic-ish, post-ish, that because we're so sedentary, I think it helps people. I think we need to, every one of us, including myself, who I've been maintaining very easily for a long time, struggled for many months during the pandemic because this sitting all day I had to kind of go back to the drawing board. So what I think it is helpful for people to close that window and just give themselves a little bit of a parameter, if you will, for what
Hmm.
I see of like, okay, no, it's not, I'm not eating after this and I don't eat before this. Where I think people make a mistake is, again, in this diet culture and them learning just the very, very top edges of a diet and just hearing about it from Shape Magazine or something like that, is that they think, oh, well, if I'm gonna eat between 12 and 8, I can eat whatever I want.
Hmm.
And that's this huge misconception around intermittent fasting from the diet people that I work with, which are kind of like everyday folks who are only hearing this piece of information and then thinking, well, if I do this, and then they don't lose any weight because they're taking in, 3,000 calories in that eating window of whatever they wanted. It's very important to be feeding yourself well in that window as well. But I love for people to use it to get in touch with their hunger signals as well. I find a lot of people don't know at all at this point what it actually feels like to be hungry or what it feels like to be thirsty. So I think like pushing that back and saying, I'm not even hungry. Why am I eating? I'm eating because someone said I should eat breakfast and because it's 8. And kind of questioning and learning to navigate your body. I think intermittent fasting is really good for that. Kind of like finding out where and what your level of best energy is. Like for me personally, I don't eat before about 1 o'clock every day. And I find I have such great energy. And I had to learn that by trial and error because I was coming from a culture that said breakfast is the most important meal of the day. But through trial and error, I was like, wow, I feel great. And then by about 1, if I don't start eating something, it gets diminishing results and I get a little anxiety. I start to feel a little off. I'm not as focused. But I learned if I eat too much food, right? So that's another mistake. They don't eat, they get overly hungry, and then they open that window and eat this giant meal. So it's all about kind of figuring out what works for your body through trial and error. And I like that. I like being able to say, get people to get in touch with what's going to really work. Are you eating when you're not hungry? You don't even know because you don't know what hunger feels like at this point.
Yeah, I love that. I love the term that you use, parameter. It is, like many, like many strategies that are out there, it's essentially a tool. And I think one of the other potential downsides, and I'm generally a fan of intermittent fasting, but
Yeah,
I
me
think
too.
one of the other downsides is that people that you know that intend on creating this fasting or this feeding window for themselves, and then don't find it to be sustainable. They blow it. They eat breakfast when they didn't intend to. Then they have this moral failure, this sense of moral failure,
Yes.
which at the end of the day, it was just a tool to begin with. And if it doesn't work for you, then it doesn't work for you. It's fine. You
Yeah.
don't need intermittent fasting to lose weight, just the same way that you don't
Right.
need to be on a ketogenic diet to lose weight.
Yeah. Oh, and that's it is, I counsel everyone who does it. Is there are days I wake up and I'm hungry at 9 a.m. and I eat at 9 a.m. because I know I'm hungry. Like I know it's true hunger. I know my body. I know what I need. So not every day looks the same. It's not this perfect, like outline and you have to follow it and be perfect all the time. And if you didn't, right, like you're saying, that's what I really learned as we looked at that brain science was that reward center, once you feel guilt and shame that you ate outside of the window, now you're a bad person. I'm always like, you didn't kill anybody. You ate breakfast, like, so really moving away from that diet culture and diet mentality of perfectionism, and needing to do it right all the time.
So true. I mean, I generally won't eat until about noon, but if a
Mhm.
family member texts me and it's 10 a.m. and they want to get breakfast, I'm not going to say no
Yeah.
because I'm so rigidly trying to adhere to my intermittent fasting window. Or when I'm traveling, sometimes not over the past 2 years, obviously, unfortunately, but I love traveling to Europe. And whenever you're in a European hotel, the breakfasts are amazing. And of course, breakfast stops being served at around 10 a.m.
Yeah.
I always make use of like a good hotel breakfast.
I miss
So
those. I miss
yeah,
those.
me too. Um, so we don't have that much time left, but I want to talk about just one more pillar. I know you said you have 6, right, that you talk
Yes.
about in your
Yes.
book. Wow,
Mhm.
incredible. But movement. Let's talk a little bit about movement. You mentioned walking. Walking is such a great place to start, I guess. But what are your thoughts on movement and finding the discipline to to move more? What are some simple behavior changes that people can make to integrate more movement into their routines?
Yeah, I mean, and we are just, it's breaking my heart. Like sitting is there, there's this saying, sitting is the new smoking. If you sit for more than 8 hours a day, you have a 90% increased risk of diabetes.
Wow.
That's insane, right? So for all of this that has happened for us, people are sitting more and those diabetes rates are going through the roof. So you really want to start thinking about kind of what I was teaching you, which is you're not going, and what you said, a body in motion stays in motion. Understanding that you're going to have to actually trigger and plan and habituate movement into your day. So, it's a, hey, okay, I drink my coffee. I put my shoes on and I walk out the door, or I, get up and I, meet a friend, or I walk my kids to school, whatever it is, and finding those ways and times to trigger that movement throughout the day. There's also that very important, just exercising for an hour and then sitting all day, it's as dangerous as not doing it at all almost. So it's really about standing up. So when you think about our bodies in this position that I'm in right now, right? I'm bent in half. I'm at this angle where blood flow is constricted to my legs. And we see that our heart rates drop and our metabolic rate drops. So, we have this huge metabolic drop while we're sitting. So just standing up and getting blood flowing in these, even 10, 15, 20-minute bursts throughout the day is truly life-changing. It fires up your metabolism. It changes your mood, so many things around it. And, I always say to people, like, if I can never get you to the exercise pillar, it is by far the hardest pillar because it's so complex and difficult and it's even painful. I'll take, walking, I will get you 100-pound weight loss with just walking. That's how powerful that pillar is. So I just want people to take that away of like, again, it's not going to be, it sounds so easy. Oh yeah, that's right. I was just going to get these 20-minute walk breaks. I, to this day, with my planned walks, still fight myself on it a lot of the time of like, I don't have time. Oh, I should make that phone call. I'll just send that email. It's okay. And I'm like, no, you won't. And I've gotten very good at shutting that brain down, which is telling me not to do something and stay seated and say the email will still be there. Get up and go. I do love wearable technology as well, because it serves as, right, just like my water bottle serves as a trigger, having that thing on your wrist serves as a trigger and a motivator. You can set it to buzz, you can set walking challenges so that you're in competition with people, so that you have more excitement around getting to that, that number. So I think using technology to trigger your behavior and motivate you can be very helpful. There are things like Step Bet, right? There's an app where you can like, you make a bet and win money, be in a step bet and get, I have lots of folks who love that because it just is like, oh, it's a small amount of money. They make like $8, like, but they get so like stuck on like, I gotta get to the step bet.
Yeah, I love that. And it also doesn't have to cost you an arm and a leg. I don't know if most people know this, but your iPhone naturally tracks your steps.
Yep.
I don't know if people can see this. I'm going to hold it
Yeah.
up. My steps are miserably low for the past few days. So I'm not don't, do as I say, not as I do kind of thing.
It looks like you're standing though, at least.
Right now I'm standing. Yeah.
That's
I'm pretty
good,
active.
right?
Yeah, I am standing. Yeah.
I liken the sitting, like the image I use is like a bent garden hose, right? If anyone's ever been out gardening and you get a kink in the garden hose and the water just kind of like flows really slowly, that's what's
Yeah.
happening when you're seated. So even you just being standing right now, your blood is forced to pump it all the way to your top and all the way through down to your toes. And that creates a much better flow and much better metabolic rate.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more. But yeah, it's the health app in
Yeah,
in your iPhone.
It's like a little red heart. It's in a white square, a little red heart. You tap that. They've been tracking your steps, guys. It's got your phone. It's creepy, but it's true. So you can look back at your history. The only thing I always say is like, if you're going to do it on that, make sure that you put your phone in your pocket all the time. Because if you sit it on your desk and it's not capturing
It's not
your
tracking.
steps. Yeah.
Yeah. Are you a big personally like gym junkie? Like, are you going to the gym
I
having
am.
crazy intense workouts or what?
Yeah, I'm certified as a personal trainer. I've
Oh wow,
done,
love that.
yeah, no, I really believe in knowing everything about my 6 pillars and experiencing that from a true research and science and data perspective, and not just coming at you with like how I feel. I personally, I'm addicted to exercise. It's totally changed my life. It makes a huge difference in my mood, in my confidence, in my just the way that I perform in a day. So I am a avid kickboxer. I love F45. I weight train. I run about 6 miles 2, 3 times a week. I just love it. And I could not, I don't think, I feel like it's such a superpower to create that habit and find how different you feel from implementing that in a day versus a day when you don't. And I think that becomes very clear when it becomes habitual.
Yeah, you're super fit. 6 miles 3 times a week to me sounds like a nightmare. People listening to that are going to be like, okay, I'm out. I
Yeah,
cannot
no, and it's not what you
possibly
have to
replicate
do.
what this
Yeah.
superwoman does.
No, and you don't have to do that, right? Like that's I was go back to my like you can walk and lose weight and you can walk and have that mood elevation. I somehow, down the years of doing this and loving it and being a part of it, developed just a real almost like a need for it for mental health too.
Mm.
I think it saved me during this pandemic. It just kept me very even and focused and optimistic. So yeah, no, you do not have to replicate my levels by any means, but I would encourage people to really investigate, their changes in their mood and their energy levels more than anything else. Don't use it as a weight loss tool. In fact, it can actually sometimes really confuse uh, what looks like weight loss because as you're gaining lean muscle, it can look like you're not losing weight on the scale, and that can frustrate people. So I think like really understanding that exercise should not be about erasing food choices. It's not a giant eraser for you to go eat what you want and then go exercise it off. It's not going to work. But more around your mood, your energy, your sleep. That's another great one, right? When you think of that connection between better sleep and exercise. So that's where I became sort of addicted, if you will, to it, and it just feels good.
I don't sleep as well on days that I haven't exercised. Exercise builds
Same.
sleep pressure.
Yeah.
So that by the time by the time your head hits the pillow, your body yearns for the opportunity to rejuvenate itself and repair and
It
to
does.
rebuild.
Yeah.
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 I love this. Well, so much great information that you've dropped. Yeah, I love the putting the focus on simple things that you can do, simple behavioral changes that are gonna take the motivation factor out of it, that are gonna take the psychology out of it. You know, you can, I forget the quote, but it's like you're essentially acting your way into a new way of being.
Yeah. That's exactly right. And I have another thing that I say all the time. I have this like equation, right? And if you saw it on a chalkboard, right, it would be a big B over T equals R. Behavior over time equals results. So if you behave differently, right, if you eat a good breakfast over time, you will lose weight. If you take a 20-minute walk in the morning and then a 20-minute walk in the evening, and you do that over time, the new behavior over time equals results. So it's not find a magic food plan, stick to it, hate your life. No, really examine the behaviors that over time, going to bed on time, and you don't have to be perfect. Consistency beats perfection every time in weight loss. So really thinking about what behaviors would I like to pick up and habituate that over time, right? If I stop eating after dinner, and over time, that's going to lead to weight loss because that's 300, 500, 700 calories that we're taking in. Over time, that leads to weight loss.
I love that. Stop eating after dinner. Eat if you're hungry when you wake up, but check in with yourself first to and question whether or not you really truly are hungry, or if you're just eating breakfast because somebody told you that you have to eat breakfast, that it's the most important meal of the day. Drink more water, walk more, get to bed on time, create a consistent sleep schedule for yourself. I mean, you almost make it sound easy.
Yeah, that's what I believe is that it is simpler than it's been made out for you to believe, and that it can be simple. It's the title of my book is The World's Simplest Weight Loss Program in 6 Easy Steps. It's simple, but it's not easy.
I
So
love that.
it's a brain game, guys. It's get in there, know there's going to be negative self-talk and disbelief and limiting beliefs and triggers and routines and habits and things that are it's simple but not easy. So I'm not minimizing that this is a really difficult thing to do. I do it. I've been doing it personally for a lot of years. So I understand the struggle. But I always say you're so worth it. You're so worth it. You do it for somebody else.
And what does success look like? I mean, we know that it's seldom linear, but how,
Absolutely.
but what does that, I mean, what does success look like to you?
I think it's really interesting. Success, what I see for people is it's certainly not linear. What I often see in weight loss is that people get excited and they get into the program and they have success, and then there's usually a little bit of a plateau.
Hmm.
And that's usually where people get kind of into this space where they're like, well, maybe it isn't working. And maybe I've come to the end of the rainbow here and I can't go any further. And what people don't understand is that like weight loss is a Rubik's Cube. It changes with every season. It changes when you go back to work. It changes when the kids go back to school. It changes when you change a job. It's constantly changing. And so for you, when you see a little stall or when you see a small regain of weight, that's what real weight loss looks like, because
Hmm.
we have real lives with real things going on. And we have to then say, oh, you know what? Okay. I had to readjust all 6 of my pillars in the pandemic. I had to go back in and rewrite my entire journey. I had to figure out how to do this all over again. I didn't have a gym. I've got 2 kids home. I had to school them. I had to do my job. I had to figure out technology. I have a husband who's a Broadway actor who's now 100% out of work, right? Like this was devastating. And I just go in and it's like a Rubik's Cube, one by one. I said, well, how am I going to do exercise? How am I going to, trigger my hydration? Because I used to carry a water bottle in my bag and it was all habitual. Now it was gone. The habits are gone. So being very aware that this is like I call it like a board game. And sometimes life's going to come in and take all the pieces and throw them back on the floor. And you're going to think, oh my gosh, I can't do this. And I say, pick one up at a time and put it back on the board. Let's think hydration this week. Let's think food next week. Let's think movement the week after that. But don't try to do everything at once. That's a big piece. So I think success comes in, for me, when I see someone understanding that this isn't linear, that this is going to go, it's going to take time, and that it's all about your behaviors and the environment and the inputs, and you noticing, right? Like me noticing I'm starting to have more cocktails than is really going to be sustainable for a healthy life or a healthy weight. And just being very real with myself. I'm not a bad person. I'm just creating a loop that feels good in the moment. But can I systematically unravel that? Can I start to make a kombucha cocktail? Can I start to go on a walk with my husband? Can I start to disrupt the loop that isn't giving me what I want ultimately? I think that's when I see real success happen. And it's not sexy, guys. Real weight loss like this that I'm talking about, it is not 10 pounds in 5 days. It is much more moderate and much more sustainable. You can have an ice cream cone with your family and you can live it, like that's what I call success, is when people realize you don't have to give everything up, but you have to make choices just like you do everywhere else in your life. I'm like, I don't understand why this spot became like this magical unicorn where, all of a sudden all the rules don't apply. You don't use your work smarts. You don't use like all the things that you use everywhere in life. It all of a sudden goes out the window in this particular space. Use the skills that you have. If you're organized, if you're, very highly motivated, like use what you've got and understand that the topography of it is going to change over and over, and you're going to have to go back to the drawing board here and there to figure out, okay, I used to take sometimes 20,000 steps a day in New York City, and now I was under 3,000 a day in the pandemic. So I had to figure something out. It's going to happen. It's just going to keep happening. Winter comes and all of a sudden I can't run outside. What am I going to do? Right? So you've got to be aware that this is not a static process at all. Like once you figure it out, you're okay. And that's the game and you're done. It's constant and it evolves. I'm 50. It's not the same as when I was 30. That's a, change of life, of where you are, where you live, what season it is. Just keep your eyes open as to what behaviors you need to work on now.
If you enjoyed that conversation, you're going to love this one. Muscle-centric medicine.
Yeah.
What's that about?
Well, it's the concept that muscle is the largest organ in the body. It's actually not just for locomotion. It's an endocrine organ. It determines everything about the way that we age.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And so, okay, before...
And it's the most underappreciated organ. So there's a cardiologist that deals with the heart. There are individuals, endocrinologists that deal with the thyroid. But what about muscle?
Yeah.
Muscle as an endocrine organ, when it contracts, it releases things called myokines.
Wow.
And myokines travel throughout the body that protect the bone and the brain. And they help with nutrition partitioning, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
That's amazing. Yeah, most people think about muscle in just one context.
Right.
Like it's aesthetic value.
Right. And that's probably the least important.
Wow.
So it's very important for aesthetics, right? Everyone wants to look good in a bikini or mankini, whatever you...
Mankini.
Right, of course.
Yeah, a sunga. I like Brazilian sungas.
Yeah. So, well, there's that. And the other aspect is that it's our metabolic currency. So it determines everything about our body composition. Why that's so important is for diseases of aging, like Alzheimer's, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, diabetes. It all starts in the muscle first.
How did you come to this realization?
Yeah. Well, it wasn't fun. I did training with Dr. Donald Lehman, who is one of the world-leading protein experts. Then I went to medical school. And then after medical school, I did 2 years of training in psychiatry and then 3 years of family medicine. And I was like, well, okay, this is great, but I need more education. So I went and I did a postdoc at Washington University in St. Louis in obesity medicine. And part of the deal with obesity medicine and nutrition is I had to do a fellowship in geriatrics. Okay, so geriatrics, as you know, is really later life, aging. Well, part of my responsibilities was running a memory clinic. And the other part was running an obesity clinic and doing studies. And there was one woman in particular. All physicians have their favorite patient. She was an incredible human being. She was in her late 40s and she had 3 kids. She had been obese her entire life and been chasing this body fat issue. This, I have to lose body fat. I have to lose weight. We imaged her brain and I saw flattening of her brain matter. And we knew within 20 years, she was going to have some serious cognitive impairment, Alzheimer's. You know, whether it was Alzheimer's or cognitive impairment, but I realized at that moment that everyone is focusing on the wrong tissue, that we are looking at the pathological problem. You know, we're looking at pathology. We're looking at adipose tissue. Most people regain the weight, but the reality is the solution is muscle. And muscle is the most underappreciated organ. And by shifting the paradigm from the failure of the fat-focused paradigm to a muscle-centric approach, we can change the trajectory of aging. And that's where muscle-centric medicine was born.
I love that. So rather than obsess over the amount of fat that we may or may not be carrying, right? You're saying, look, that's putting the cart before the horse.
Totally. Insulin resistance is a problem everybody talks about. That is a primary deficit in the skeletal muscle first. Insulin resistance starts in the skeletal muscle because skeletal muscle is the primary site for glucose disposal. However, everybody is talking about fat tissue. That comes later. Muscle tissue is like a suitcase. If you overfill it, things spill back into the bloodstream. Then you store it as fat, not first. So by optimizing muscle tissue through resistance exercise, through really understanding the importance of dietary protein, high quality dietary protein, you can take care of this tissue that declines with aging, that becomes more insulin resistant, that becomes more anabolically resistant. By understanding that this is the mechanism of health, you can protect your family members.
That's amazing. So in the practical sense, if you're looking in the mirror and you are overweight, perhaps you've got some some observable traits of like metabolic syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, your waist is, larger than it should be. You're saying don't worry about the weight loss. Focus on putting on as much muscle
Right.
as you can for your frame and for your genetics.
Totally. You have to correct metabolic composition first. By correcting and making sure that you have healthy muscle tissue, the weight will come off. But by focusing on the weight loss, the quick fix, the fasting even, it's not about the amount of weight that you lose, it's about the quality. So every time you lose weight, for the most part, you lose partially muscle tissue and partially fat tissue. But if you do it strategically, the majority of the weight can just be fat. But it really takes some time and effort. And that is so valuable when we think about the recidivism, the regain weight.
You mentioned myokines.
Yeah.
What are those?
Myokines are, they're actually cytokines. So they're proteins that are particularly secreted by the muscle tissue when it contracts. For example, the most famous myokine is interleukin 6. And people are going to say, but interleukin 6, that's part of the cytokine system, that's part of the immune system. Well, yes, but muscle, when you contract muscle tissue, the myokine, for example, interleukin 6, is anti-inflammatory. So your skeletal muscle system actually works in conjunction with your immune system. And it has a counter-regulatory effect. Also, interleukin 6 allows for nutrient partitioning. So you'll utilize more fat tissue. You'll utilize more fatty acids. You'll utilize more glucose. So, oftentimes when we think about exercise, we just think about that contractile health or the mitochondrial health. But when you really shift your focus to think about muscle as an endocrine organ and what it secretes, it totally changes the importance and the perspective.
That's amazing. BDNF is also released by muscle tissue.
And that's considered another myokine.
What is BDNF for listeners who are hearing?
So it's brain-derived neurotropic factor, and it helps with memory. And we know the studies are really clear that the more you exercise, the better your memory, the better your cognition. And I know that's particularly of interest to you and important for you and what you value.
Huge.
Yeah.
So we have a lot to gain by gaining more.
We have everything to lose if we don't.
And we have everything to lose if we don't.
Yeah.
It becomes increasingly difficult to grow and maintain muscle mass as we get older, right? It does.
And part of this is due to something called anabolic resistance.
Anabolic resistance. It's the first time I'm hearing that.
Yeah, interesting. So the concept of anabolic resistance is there's a decrease in nutrient sensing in the body, in particular the muscle. So individuals require more dietary protein at one time to overcome this anabolic resistance, which is essentially an inefficiency of utilizing protein. And that's oftentimes why we see individuals who eat the way that they did when they were 20, continue to eat the same kind of macronutrients, get skinny fat because they never adapt and adopt to their changing hormonal milieu, which is testosterone decreases, IGF-1 decreases, which we're going to talk about. All these hormones decrease. And if you don't overcompensate for dietary protein, then your muscles don't even stand a chance. So for listeners, what does that mean? What is a take-home message? Well, we know that if you have a robust amount of protein, and really when I say robust, that's between 30 and 50 grams per meal, you can overcome that anabolic resistance. And in particular, it's the high-quality protein because it has the most abundant amino acids. And I know that we're going to talk about mTOR for the listeners. I don't want to give too much away.
I hope so.
The high-quality protein has higher amounts of the branch chains, in particular leucine. And leucine is what triggers muscle protein synthesis. And interestingly, it triggers it through mTOR, which is mechanistic target of rapamycin, which is very controversial for people because they say, well, when you stimulate mTOR, you have a growth factor that may contribute to cancer. Okay, so should we unpack that
Let's
now, or
break
should
this
we wait?
apart.
Okay.
Well, actually, before we get there, so we're talking about leucine,
Yep.
right? If you have, because I know that you're an expert in protein, and this is part of your background is to really look into protein quality as well. If you have, say, 30 grams worth of protein in the form of chicken breast,
Mm-hmm.
and you've got 30 grams worth of protein in the form of peanut butter,
Mm-hmm.
or
How about let me give you an example.
give me an example.
Okay, so 30 grams of protein in a chicken breast is about 4 ounces.
Mm-hmm.
That's a little. To equate that to, say, a plant-based protein, it would be about 6 cups of quinoa.
6 cups of quinoa.
Yeah.
To get to get the amino acid equivalent
Exactly.
of 4 ounces of
Exactly.
chicken breast.
So that is metabolically devastating.
Hmm.
If we talk about carbohydrates, we can really talk about what that means and the best amount of carbohydrates. But really, when you think about carbohydrates, it has to be dosed in a meal threshold, right? Because you want to maintain insulin levels. You don't want to have a very robust insulin response, but you have to protect your tissue. So the difference between animal-based proteins and, quality versus plant is you have to consume maybe 35% more. And it has so many more carbohydrates.
Yeah.
So it's just not doable. So this becomes very dangerous with this current narrative. Everybody's talking about going more plant-based. But the data, the NHANES data, which is the largest data set, would suggest we're already plant-based.
Yeah. I mean, 60% of the calories that we consume come from ultra-processed foods, which are low-protein foods.
Right. So we're already plant-based. The argument could be we need better plants. But as it relates to protein, we can't confuse a plant-based diet with a high-quality protein diet. You just cannot.
Are there differences in the protein quality itself?
Oh, yeah.
There's I forget the acronym, but it's like the DIA.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sorry, just making a mess in your. Okay.
It's all good.
It's all right. So when you think about protein quality, you think about the DIAs. So these are digestibility amino acid scores, and these are hard, fast biological numbers. And it's really based on the quality of the amino acids and the digestibility of the amino acids. And when you really a good practical way to think about that is animal-based proteins, including eggs or whey, those kinds of things, have a higher amino acid score. They are higher in the bioavailability.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas plant, and there's some researchers out there that would say soy and wheat are just the same. But that's really tortured data, and you really cannot change the biological value of amino acids. And I think, people have to be very aware and particular about where they get their information and really just thinking critically about it, right? So you can look at a steak, that steak is not the same quality as a broccoli.
Yeah, well, I mean, I just know, and I've there was this channel that I grew up watching that actually had surgeries on it. I think it was Discovery Health when that existed. Yeah. And I've seen enough of those to know that we are red meat. When you open us up, we're like beef.
Exactly.
You open up a cow and you open up a human being, they look pretty similar.
Right.
And so to me, intuitively, logically, it just stands to reason that when you eat something like that, you're going to get to create more of what makes you healthy and robust.
And actually, you bring up a great point, because the quality of muscle tissue, skeletal muscle tissue that we eat is very similar to our own tissue. And it provides the correct amino acid profile, in particular those branch chains, those leucine, isoleucine, and valine, that we need in the correct amounts. And that's where it becomes so important to understand that it's not just eat high quality protein. It's eat the correct amount of protein in a 24-hour period, which is arguably well above double the RDA. So the RDA is 0.8 grams per kilogram. 1.6 grams per kilogram is probably still on the lower end.
Wow.
In my clinical practice, I recommend 1 gram per pound ideal body weight, because protein isn't just about muscle. It also helps with appetite regulation. And we know body composition is the ultimate. But we don't really eat for protein. We eat for those amino acids. And there's 20 different amino acids, and they do all kinds of different things. And that's what we need. So you have to understand that it's a 24-hour period. And then you have to break it down to bolus feeding meals. And that's so important, especially as we're aging, and especially when we think about sarcopenia, which is the loss of muscle mass and function, and when we think about anabolic resistance. So these things are the cornerstone. And they're missing in the conversation because we have a failure of this fat-focused paradigm.
Resistance training, I'm sure, is a big part of your
Huge.
prescription for health, right? Would your recommendations, this 30 to 50 gram of protein per meal recommendation, change for somebody who maybe is not yet on an intense resistance training regimen?
I love this question. When you so the simple answer is no, because you still require that amino acid bolus to stimulate muscle protein synthesis.
Can you stimulate muscle protein synthesis without without resistance training?
So you can stimulate it two ways, really, arguably. You can stimulate it through dietary protein and resistance exercise.
So you can literally change your body composition just purely by eating more protein.
You can. You do have to control for calories, but you absolutely can, and I've seen it happen.
Wow.
Arguably, resistance exercise is even more important than diet when it comes to the literature, which I actually didn't want to believe. But it really is important to, challenge the muscle and stimulate it. You can't get away from that. Right. Especially as you think about maintaining overall health.
That's so interesting. So, there have been a number of studies that have shown that, people that as they get older, especially the above 65 set, increased longevity, reduced risk of cancer when they consume more protein. But there's been a number of studies that have shown the opposite for people who are younger. Can you help us make sense of all that?
So let's just take a step back and think about what is meaningful when we think of statistics and when we think of scientific studies. So a lot of the information, the studies that have come out are epidemiological studies. So they're not randomized controlled trials. They're what we would consider low quality data. And when you think about epidemiological studies, you think about relative risk or risk ratio. And in order for something to be clinically significant, it has to be above 2. Let me give you an example. Smoking and cancer. It has a relative risk of 12. They looked at all the study and all the literature of cancer and protein. Guess what the relative risk was?
Probably a fraction.
1.1.
Wow.
So the question becomes, at what point do we find something relevant?
1.1 meaning a 10% increased relative?
So in order for it to be clinically significant, the relative risk has to be above 2.
Got it.
1.1 is clinically insignificant.
Got it. So it's basically meaningless.
Correct. However, if you torture the data enough, you'll get the information you want. For example, the IARC committee. So everyone will say meat is a carcinogen. So the IARC committee came out with this position saying that red meat is a carcinogen or processed meat. The Annals of Internal Medicine, first of all, reviewed all of this. Annals of Internal Medicine is like the Super Bowl of literature. I mean, it's one of the most highly respected journals.
Huge impact factor.
Exactly. They found no increased risk. The committee that actually talked about protein and cancer risk turned out to be largely vegetarian. And they had a very strict criteria where they threw out all the high quality data. They limited a large amount of the randomized control trials and used low quality epidemiological data. It seems to me that there is a massive agenda problem.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Right? But the issue is that prevents people from understanding health.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So,
and you asked about IGF-1.
Yeah, so I do want to know about.
Yeah.
I do want to know.
Yeah. So if IGF-1 was really a problem and higher levels of IGF-1 was an issue.
Well, what is IGF-1?
IGF-1 is insulin-like growth factor.
Okay.
Then everyone in their 30s, when IGF-1 is their highest, arguably, or maybe late 20s, would have cancer. But you never see that. It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up. And then there's this conversation about mTOR and cancer. Let's take a step back. So mTOR is mechanistic target of rapamycin. And people say that it's one of the pathways for growth promotion, which it is. Did you know that there's mTOR in every single tissue?
Yeah, that it's not just like this. It's like your mTOR isn't this like singular dial that controls growth in the. Yeah, it's like expressed in different tissues at different times.
Exactly. And what if I told you it's sensitive to different macronutrients as well? Skeletal muscle is exquisitely sensitive to dietary protein. mechanistic target of rapamycin, mTOR, is what helps and promotes muscle protein synthesis through via leucine, which we talked about earlier. But mTOR is also stimulated by other things like excess calories and excess insulin, which the liver and the pancreas are much more sensitive to. So if you're really concerned about mTOR and cancer, the worst thing that you could do is eat a high carbohydrate diet with excess calories. But it arguably has nothing to do with protein and amino acids. That's like saying exercise is bad for you because stimulating muscle is bad for you.
Well, also you want mTOR to be stimulated in muscle.
Of course you do.
Right. And you mentioned also that protein has this hunger satiating effect.
It does.
More so than carbs, more so than fat.
Right.
And so if protein is a tool that keeps you in a eucaloric sort of balance, right? Then that's amazing.
Exactly. So really what we're looking at is an anti-animal narrative where people that are just truly against eating animals, and it's very emotional for them. So they go to an environmental conversation, they go to a cancer conversation. And by the way, if you just think about the conversation, what kind of cancer are we even talking about?
Right.
Right? Are we talking about lung cancer, which hasn't changed in the last 40 years? Are we talking about other forms of cancer, endometrial cancer, uterine cancer? Cancers are really related to obesity. That is a risk factor. That is a known risk factor. Being obese is oncogenic. So where does protein and cancer come in if someone were to really think critically about what is this narrative?
Well, what about, getting specific with the cancers, isn't there a more sort of, isn't there a stronger connection between protein and like colon cancer, for example, or meat and breast cancer?
No, you have to look at the relative risk. If the relative risk is less than 2, then all of these things are low quality epidemiological data. Arguably, the best thing you can do for any of these things is to have an optimal body composition. Keep inflammation low, stay strong. High quality muscle mass is, directly related to your survivability. The lower your skeletal muscle mass, the higher your morbidity and mortality.
I've got a lot of female listeners that might be hearing what you're saying, and the way that might be interpreted is to get more bulky, more muscular.
It's impossible. How long have you been training?
My whole life.
Exactly. How easy.
And look at me.
No. But I mean, how easy. The most that, really, and this is what I was talking to Dr. Don Lehman about this, and the most we've ever seen someone put on muscle without any kind of anabolic agents is you're looking at 2 pounds a month with an untrained individual. The more trained you are, you know how hard it is to put on skeletal muscle?
It's hard.
It is impossible. Have you ever met a girl say, I just am not going to, I'm afraid I'm going to get bulky. I'm going to really train hard, but I'm afraid I'm going to get bulky. In the history of never, I've never seen that. I've seen thousands of patients. No one has ever said, well, I'm getting too bulky.
I think you have like these fit influencers on Instagram now that, many females who probably are taking other kinds of substances. Right. And so, but that's not how your average female is going to look once they start resistance training.
No, you're going to look better. You're going to have tighter skin. You're going to likely be smaller. You're going to have better body composition. You're going to improve your inflammatory markers. You're going to improve your glucose control because you have more skeletal muscle. Muscle is your metabolic currency. It is the largest site for glucose disposal. When you think about your resting metabolic rate, muscle is it. Muscle is incredibly underappreciated. And especially as you transition to perimenopause, menopause, the more muscle you can put on in your 20s, 30s, and 40s, the better you're going to be because it becomes more difficult.
Isn't bone mineral density something that many women struggle with?
Totally.
How does that relate to muscle mass and protein consumption?
And we actually looked at this a lot at WashU. The higher the protein intake, the better the bone density.
Wow.
Because bone is made of protein.
Isn't there what's one of the misconceptions that's often waged against high protein diets that it can
bad for the kidneys, number one, which actually that has been massively disproven. There's multiple meta-analysis, so a group of really high quality papers that have come out. It actually improves kidney function. It improves glomerular filtration rate.
Are these in people with healthy kidneys?
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Are there any? Do you know of any kidney pathological kidney indications that would maybe preempt somebody from adopting a high protein diet? Or
I'm definitely not a nephrologist, so I would ask those guys. But if you are healthy, they've never seen an individual consume too much protein.
What I found, there's actually a dearth of nephrologists that specialize in nutrition as well.
Amazing.
If anybody listening to this knows a nephrologist who specializes in nutrition, please hit me up, because that's an area that I'd love to explore further.
When you think about kidneys, you think about diabetes, because there's, the individuals that really go on dialysis are oftentimes diabetics with now kidney issues.
Mm-hmm.
It's a glucose problem.
And then so bone mineral density.
Yeah, that is another huge myth. Everybody thinks that the more protein you eat, it's bad for your bones. That is totally false. And again, we looked at some of this at WashU, that the higher the protein intake with resistance training, the better the bone density.
Amazing.
And you have to really think, you have to think about your parents. Oftentimes it's been missed. The resistance training piece is really missed. People talk a lot about yoga, talk a lot about Pilates, and then there's meatheads who, I love. My husband's a total meathead. But there's a whole spectrum of training. And, it's really important to do resistance training, and it doesn't have to be heavy. And I cringe when I say that, but the data supports that as long as you have enough volume going to failure. And this is, out of Stu Phillips' lab in Canada. We won't hold that against him. I love Stu. But you have to get that resistance training done. There's no way around it. It's kind of like you might do something for your heart. You have to do something for this tissue, this contractile tissue.
Yeah, I think a lot of women who go to their doctors, and maybe they see that they need to up their bone mineral density. They'll start taking a calcium supplement.
Yeah,
which is there. Correct me if I'm wrong. Haven't there been a number of studies that have shown that that taking calcium supplementally actually can increase risk for heart disease?
So there is some evidence about that. I do recommend calcium in my practice. I recommend calcium, vitamin D, K2, and also in certain amounts. You can't just take a whole bolus of calcium all at once. That's not what is recommended. And right now, a lot of us are not getting enough calcium, and that is true. So there are times in which I do recommend that in a responsible way. That's really important.
Yeah. Man, protein. Yeah. It's, so what then, there's like this dogma in the nutrition space to just, all things in moderation, everything's about balance. So walk me through like a day of eating for you. Like what is a balanced, and I'm using air quotes, balanced meal look like for you? So
I don't know if I believe in the balance, and I'm just being truthful. I think that the number one thing that you have to do is you have to determine your ideal body weight. Mm-hmm. I'm 125 pounds. I'll keep that as an ideal body weight. I'll have 125 grams of protein. What's your ideal body weight?
Probably like around what I am now, give or take a few pounds, but I usually hang out at around 185 pounds.
Okay. So that's how much protein I would recommend that you have. And that would be how you build a baseline nutrition plan. Mm-hmm. After that, I think about, do you like carbohydrates or do you like fat? I personally don't eat many carbohydrates. And if you think about it, for every 100 grams of protein you eat, you generate 60 grams of carbohydrates.
For every 100 grams of protein you eat, you generate 60%? Wow.
So an individual could do a largely, protein-based diet and generate all the glucose they need through gluconeogenesis. So for me, when I think about building my nutrition plan, I think about the high-quality protein. And then I think, do I want carbohydrates or do I want fat? The current recommendation is 150 grams of carbohydrates a day. That's a lot, especially if you have any kind of metabolic impairment. That's too much. You have to then think about carbohydrates in a meal-to-meal basis. And I'm really glad that you asked me this. If you want to optimize body composition, carbohydrates need to be at 40 grams or less per meal. I don't care how you get it. It's 40 grams or less per meal.
You haven't mentioned the word ketosis once.
No.
You're not, that's not the goal.
No, it's not for me, because while a ketogenic style diet may be good for certain things, whether there's certain kinds of cancer, but it might be muscle sparing, but it's not muscle promoting. There are decades of literature to support optimal protein diet to protect muscle tissue and grow muscle tissue. That is my number one priority. So individuals that do a ketogenic diet, I can understand that they're dealing with, wanting to mitigate risk factors, or maybe they're obese, but arguably, why not do an optimal protein diet? Truly, try it. I have implemented into thousands of patients' nutrition plan, and I've seen some detrimental effects with a ketogenic style diet. I've seen it change hormones. I've seen it increase reverse T3. I've seen it much less effective in women, and I couldn't tell you why. That's just my clinical experience, and I know there's physicians out there and people that would argue differently, but again, you have to experiment with yourself. I come from a muscle-centric view, and I think that when we focus on muscle tissue as the organ of longevity, as our number one priority, then we're talking about real root cause medicine. Fat tissue comes later. That's focused again on pathology. If we focus on pathology, we're chasing our tail. Because that's the example in medicine. In medicine, they always focus on pathology. But solution-based eating is really muscle-centric. So anyway, you asked me about carbohydrates. You actually asked me about my nutrition.
Yeah.
40 grams or less, because that diminishes the insulin response. And then fat intake is as desired. Simple.
Got it. So
4 times a day.
Okay. So how many meals a day are you eating?
3 to 4.
3 to 4?
Anywhere between 30 to 50 grams of protein. It's okay if I overshoot protein, because protein is very difficult to store as fat. There's never been any negative studies. They've gone up to 3.3 grams per kilogram easily.
Wow.
And we've never seen any detrimental effects. Improves satiation. It improves body turnover, right? So we're replacing 300 grams a day. Everyone focus on gut health. One of the amino acids, threonine, is so important for mucin production, for gut health. Our immune cells utilize these amino acids for health. It's so under-discussed and so important.
So what is a plate? Give me like your breakfast plate and your dinner plate. Like what do those look like?
Eggs. Breakfast is eggs. We have a little infant, so it's whatever is easy. Maybe 5 eggs, whole eggs, heritage eggs, blue.
I like that.
They're amazing.
Blue shells?
Yeah,
wow.
blue and brown shells.
Oh
Delicious.
my God.
I know.
So wait, you're not also thinking got to get my fiber? Like what do you?
No, I don't actually.
You don't? Interesting.
And I'm not sure what I think about this whole fiber situation. I think it really depends on the gut microbiome. But the scientists would argue with me and say, but you know what? There's good data out there that fiber clearly supports good gut health and biodiversity. That may be true, but I can tell you from my clinical experience in NF1, which is not quite important, that I don't need it. And I have a ton of patients that do well without it.
Interesting. Yeah, I feel, I love to go in on the eggs first thing in the morning, but I just, I feel like it's not, intuitively, I just feel like for me, it's not complete without some kind of either I'll slice up a tomato or eat an avocado or, something additional. But yeah, I get that fiber, there is this sort of blanket recommendation that people should just eat more fiber. Right. But that's not going to work for every person.
It doesn't.
In fact, the minute if you abruptly try to increase your fiber dramatically, you're going to have all kinds of digestive, inconveniences. That
was a very polite way of saying that.
Digestive inconveniences.
Yeah.
We've all had them, right?
But I think you bring up a really good point, in that what we're seeing now is nutrition is so much more about things that perhaps we don't have our finger on the pulse of. For example, I know some vegan and vegetarian patients that thrive, and my vegan patients have almost they have very little protein. I think to myself, why is that? So there is a component of biodiversity that seems to defy certain things. Arguably they're going to be smaller, they're going to have less muscle mass, their bone density is going to be worse. There's all these other things, but there are going to be some studies coming out that the gut microbiome does break down to provide amino acids. It hasn't been out yet, but I do know that it is being worked on, and I do know that it will come out. So it'll just be something interesting to look at.
It's very interesting. But you're not a carnivore, right?
No, but I would say I'm much closer to, if I were to define myself, to a carnivore style diet. I'll have an avocado. I don't think carnivores eat avocado.
Well, what if you're regularly engaging in super intense, HIIT training or resistance training, is there a benefit to titrating up carbohydrates or?
Yeah. Well, number one, it really depends on the individual. So my husband was in the military for a really long time. Those guys that are going on long deployments, they're definitely not doing any kind of caloric restriction or carbohydrate restriction. They're carrying really heavy packs. So those guys, you think for every hour of more intense exercise over 120 beats per minute, you can generate the need for the body between 30 and 70 grams of carbohydrates per hour, depending on what you're doing. I also have a lot of athletes that do not require carbohydrates, that do very well in a more protein adapted plate. Just as we were talking before, that for every 100 grams of protein that you ingest, you generate 60 grams of carbohydrates. So through gluconeogenesis, it's your body generating the carbohydrates. You don't actually have to ingest it. So it really depends on the athletic performance. It depends on the athlete. So it's not necessary.
Yeah. I'll just throw my own anecdote into the mix.
He was doing clubs before we got here.
I was, yeah. I actually don't know what I'm doing with the clubs, but I have some. But I've been boxing lately. I've been taking private boxing lessons, which is a very, very intense workout. And there's a number of confounding variables. Some days I do it in LA and it's just super hot out. Some days it's not as hot out. But what I've noticed is that if I do it fasted in the morning, and I actually typically love to have fasted workouts, but with boxing in particular, because it's such a specific kind of exercise, high intensity anaerobic exercise, I find that if I do it fasted, I just bonk a lot quicker than on days when I eat like a banana beforehand. And I don't typically, this is sort of like a new thing for me because I never in the past felt the need for carbohydrates before a workout. So I don't know. I'm just sort of like experimenting and seeing what works best. Cause some days it just gets really hot and there's like, as I mentioned, there's all these different variables, but yeah, sometimes I find like I do perform better, more effortlessly when I have some of that carbohydrate to go around.
And you wouldn't be alone in saying that. I would also be interested to see how you did on creatine, 5 grams of creatine. Yeah. As well as perhaps, electrolytes throughout the workout and branched chain amino acids. It would just be interesting to see how you do and if there's any anecdotal improvement.
Yeah. BCAAs, talk to me about those because those are, people, you see them all the time in the fitness community. How do those compare to just eating whole protein?
Well, and Bob Wolf came out with a great paper on this particular thing. And it was pretty controversial. And he's in Galveston, Texas. So here's what I think about branched chain amino acids. There's a place for them, but there's 20 amino acids. In order to have muscle protein synthesis, which is really what everyone is looking for when they're thinking about branched chain, is you need the whole spectrum. So what would happen if you took BCAAs on an empty stomach for your muscle, for muscle protein synthesis? Nothing. Nothing. It would be like turning a key to a car and trying to start the car without any gas. But here's where it actually is exceptional. For your listeners who are vegetarian or vegan or who say, you know what, I don't really want to eat a higher protein diet, you put in a scoop of branched chain amino acids, and then this goes back to the beginning of our conversation, you increase that leucine amount. Now you're talking about augmenting the proper meal. That is where they're exceptional. So branched chain amino acids in, say, for example, if you're having 2 or 3 ounces of fish, or maybe you're having your 5 cups of quinoa, you throw that branched chain amino acid in and your muscle views it as a protein bolus and you have the rest of the amino acids to help.
Wait, what? Fish, though, is a great protein source, no?
Yeah. So fish has about 5 grams of protein per 1 ounce. So you would need 6 ounces of salmon. You're a bigger dude, that would be no problem. I could never eat that much.
Interesting.
I could maybe eat 4 ounces, which would give me 20 grams of protein. But if I told you the most important thing that you can do is protect muscle at all costs, and as we age, the tissue becomes more anabolically resistant, then the thing that I have to do to protect my tissue is to make sure I'm getting 2.5 grams of leucine per meal.
This is so surprising. So fish has a lower protein density
it does.
Than chicken and beef? Wow.
And because it's not gravity bearing. So again, you pointed out so astutely that like fuels like. I mean, unless you're scaly and slimy, which I don't know anyone who is.
No, I know some people that are.
But so it actually has a different protein density.
Wow, because they're not gravity. So
Exactly. It's not a gravity bearing. But then someone would say, well, what about an egg? Well, but an egg is kind of the precursor to the chicken. But if it swims, it just has a lower protein density.
fish are just not swole.
They're not. No,
They're not.
No, that would be weird.
Wow. That's super interesting. What about carbohydrates? Going back to the low carbohydrate recommendation and like thyroid function and things like that.
Clinically, I have seen, so now we're talking about, I think, more of a calorie issue.
Got it.
So
interesting.
In an individual who is really restricting calories, I think it's less of a carbohydrate issue and more just about total calorie restriction. And you could easily see that in labs. I actually do believe that low carb is fantastic. But again, a guy like you or a guy like my husband, he is not going to do well on the low carb, right? Fit, healthy.
Yeah.
And I mean, he's super active. His idea of running for fun is going for a 14-mile jog or whatever he does.
Yeah, I do well on low carb, just to be clear. But with specific kinds of exercise, I find it better to carb load. There's probably also value in backloading.
There is. So I would say that's when I use carbohydrates the most, is later on in the day.
Interesting.
The first meal of the day is most important. I don't care when you have it. If you have it at noon, that's fine. But this sets up you for metabolic flexibility. It is, you get that first meal right. You're not chasing blood sugar. You're not chasing insulin. You're not chasing, a drop in blood sugar and then your heart's racing because you're having to generate glucose and cortisol. So I would say that the first meal of the day, you keep low carbohydrate and that you place your carbs, if you're going to have them, around exercise, or simply you backload your carbohydrates to the meal before bed. I have seen that really help with deep sleep.
Wow, interesting.
So these are just practical tips for people to really understand. But I'm telling you, if they take away nothing else, they have to understand that protein matters in a 24-hour period in a proper distribution. So really, it could be 4 to 5 hours. That's really when you're thinking about that mTOR, that reset. Mm-hmm. And then getting protein in the right amounts. So there's a lot of talk about the ketogenic space and the low carb space, but nobody's talking about dosing protein correctly. And it's no wonder that we have all these subsequent health effects, even if someone is low carb, because no one's addressed muscle tissue.
So every 3 to 4 hours,
4 to 5.
Every 4 to 5 hours.
I would say 4 to 5 hours because it allows that. It allows for that mechanism in the muscle cell to reset, which is really important because when I think about feeding, I think about two things. Are you eating to remove hunger? So that's one thing, so I'm just going to have a snack that's maybe under 250 calories, or am I eating for a metabolic purpose? And when you're eating for a metabolic purpose, the concept is really spreading those meals so that you're getting that full anabolic response.
I love that. 1 gram of protein per pound of goal body weight.
Yep. Ideal body weight.
Ideal body weight.
Yeah.
What are your views on protein shakes? And then second part of that question, what's your view on collagen?
Great question. Protein shakes can be very valuable. They have to be drank. They have to be taken at one time.
At one time.
So you cannot sip it, because if you sip it, you are then sub-threshold of that amino acid content. And this is the number one thing that I see people do. They'll say, I'm going to have this protein shake, and they'll sip it over an hour.
I don't understand. So you're saying if you're going to do a protein shake, you've got to slam it?
Well,
drink it really?
Eat it within a half an hour, the whole thing.
Interesting.
Drink it. Don't eat it. That would be weird. Unless you're microwaving it, or I don't know.
You can make like an ice cream with protein shake. Yeah.
Maybe. But one time.
Interesting.
As you push that out, remember the goal for muscle health is to get the bolus amount of amino acids in the bloodstream at once. Anything below that, you're just getting calories. And yeah, the amino acids do other things. They help with vasodilation and they do all that stuff, but the body cares about maintaining muscle tissue and just tissue turnover. So if you don't get enough protein, then the body is just going to go for short-term survival. So that's what I think about protein shakes. And
like types of protein that you prefer, like is it whey?
So I like whey.
Egg. Okay.
I think whey is great because if you're going to have egg, just eat the egg. Whey has a great amino acid profile. I do utilize the rice pea blend for people that are sensitive, but I'm not a super fan because we don't know what those long-term effects are. It's with pea, right? We have no idea. It has estrogen activity. We have no idea. So I would say a great whey is fantastic. And then you asked me about collagen.
Wait, but before you, sorry.
Yeah.
So whey, and then
rice pea blends.
Is there, because whey, one thing that I've always known about whey is that it digests very fast.
But that's what you need.
That's what you need. So there's no problem with consuming whey in the middle of the day. Like it's not just a post-workout tool.
No. In fact, when I did geriatrics, that was something that we always recommended.
Whey protein.
But, I will say that, and I will say that, I failed to mention this earlier, that when you exercise, your muscles are primed.
Right.
So essentially you're getting more nutrient delivery. So you could actually, and I don't want to confuse anyone, but you could get away with less protein.
In the post-workout window?
Yeah.
Interesting.
But we're not going to recommend anyone do that, but it is a possibility.
Yeah. All right. So whey it is. Collagen.
Okay. Collagen is an incomplete protein. First of all, I love collagen and I dose it pretty high in my practice, but not for a protein content. It has glycine, hydroxyproline. It has other higher levels of amino acids, but it's completely devoid of tryptophan and very low in branched chains. In fact, it's not considered a complete protein. Doesn't mean it doesn't have some effect. And I don't think that anyone knows the mechanism of action, which is interesting. And I've read quite a bit about this. It can stimulate growth factors. It's also great for hair, skin, and nails, which arguably, if you try it, anyone would say that's true, especially, I dose it at 2 scoops twice a day. But when you're looking at total caloric intake, you shouldn't even count it towards your protein.
Got it. So absolutely don't count the grams of collagen that you consume towards your 1 gram per pound of ideal body weight.
No, but you can count it towards calories. And there are some great benefits of collagen. Again, I use it all the time.
Use it all the time?
I do.
Hair, skin, nails, glycine, just for...
Anxiety, helps with sleep.
Are you a believer in terms of glycine's capacity to boost metabolic health and for its longevity benefits and things like that? Chris Masterjohn talks a lot about that.
I think it's a possibility. I think that we don't have a lot of good human trials. And when I think about branched chain or when I think about amino acids in particular, there's that whole methionine restriction story. And I don't want to go down a rabbit hole of methionine restriction. It's one of the amino acids, and they use it in the fasting mimicking diet. They say you should restrict methionine, but all the studies are done in rats. And rats have a different methionine need. So there are just a lot of things that we need to think about. Is there good evidence for this? And I can't say. I think that in theory it could be amazing, but I just don't think we know enough.
We don't know enough.
Right.
Yeah. Interesting. I use collagen as well.
How many scoops do you do?
I do 1 to 2, and I use it when I can sneak it into things that I'm consuming. So like soups, coffees, coffee drinks, things like that, smoothies. So I'm a fan. Well, we don't have that much time left. Is there anything else that that we want to talk about that I haven't brought up? I feel like we've covered so much.
I think that people in this time right now, we have more access to information than ever before. I think because of that, we have more access to confusion, and we have narratives that are pulling at our minds and pulling at our dollars. So I think finding good scientists that you trust is paramount, and I think asking the right questions, because the answers that you get are a reflection of the questions that you ask. So I think that that's just really important to understand, because when we ask the right questions, we can protect the people we love.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
So
what do you see online that most angers you, like in terms of like nutritional misinformation?
So protein is obviously the number one, and it's for a very particular reason. So I have a 17-year education, which is gross.
That's amazing.
It's gross. But
I wish I had your background.
No,
you have a badass background.
But I've seen so much death. And this is the part, and this is why it's so important for me to get my message out there. And if your viewers are inspired, that they share. I have sat at the bedside of more people than I can count at their, deathbed. And that's part of being a geriatrician, is you're there when they leave life, right? The amount of falls the amount of injuries, the amount of hip fractures that I have seen because the focus has always been focus on obesity, focus on this, focus on the wrong thing. We could have prevented these injuries. We could have prevented the devastating effects of Alzheimer's. I mean, not all of it, right? There's some that are genetic and some that are beyond our control, but we have the duty to analyze the data, take people with experience, and protect the people we love because, there's a lot of argument that happens when everyone's younger. In your 40s, I'm just going, no, be plant-based, be this, do this. That conversation changes dramatically when you can no longer stand, when someone you love falls and breaks a hip and they're never coming home. They're going into assisted living, which is like, you don't want to need assistance in living. It will debilitate you. So by changing the paradigm from this fat-focused paradigm to the real issue, which is muscle, we can protect the people we love. We can protect each other because there is a point in time where it's too late. And that's very powerful.
Yeah. I talk a lot about privilege and that it's this term that's thrown about today. It's almost become sort of like this weaponized thing. People use it to point fingers at one another and to create division. But I mean, you're so right that like adopting, these like vegan diets and just being so, and following the dietary advice of documentaries and things like that. Right. It's like, it really is a first world privilege and primarily one of youth, I think. Because when you're older, when you're from another, from the third world, but other countries too, like, that are not necessarily third world. And when you're sick, none of this like bickering that we see all the time in the nutrition space, like matters, At the end of the day, you want to do what's going to be right for your health. And I find that that's one of the things that motivates me is helping people cut through the noise and get to like the truth. And that's why I'm so grateful for people like you who are like taking such a no nonsense approach about.
And I've been there. I'm not coming at it from a place where I haven't seen so much death that it makes me sick. It's not from this point of saying, oh, well, this is what I believe because I read this, or this is what I believe because of,
because I've got a supplement line or whatever. Yeah.
It completely changes your perspective when you're working in a nursing home and you're seeing what they've eaten and you're taking their history and you're seeing this stuff. And I'm seeing online all this BS and all these people, listen, I get a lot of hate. For what? I guarantee you when you are that age, you are going to go, God, I was so dumb. And this was the advice I was giving my parents. Don't eat red meat because it's going to hurt you, or don't do that. It's the wrong advice. It's the single worst piece of advice we could ever give people. Don't eat your meat. Don't eat your protein. It's dangerous. It's deadly. So anyway,
no,
that's why I feel so passionate, because I've seen it. You tell me one other person that sat there, they would be saying the exact same thing I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it. One person.
You have.
But the most important person in my life.
I can't imagine.
And that person, my mom, she was a meat abstainer. She never ever, and I'm not being hyperbolic.
Yeah.
She never ate red meat, and she never ate eggs. She occasionally would eat chicken, but very rarely, and occasionally would eat fish, but very, very rarely. And she tried to be, she was health conscious.
Right.
Like if you were to ask her, she was somebody for whom health mattered. And she was just abiding by the guidelines and abiding by the conventional wisdom.
And this is what we're hearing.
Yeah.
And so it's our duty to protect people from themselves by hopefully opening the lines of communication for education.
Boom. I love that. So true. So true. Needs to be heard and repeated. Dr. Lyon, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah.
I've just got one last question for you, but before we get to that, where can listeners find you on social media?
Yes, they can find me on Instagram, Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, and that's Lyon, and my website. And I have a great free protocol that they can download. I also have a YouTube channel where I talk a lot about this stuff and the studies coming out and just information. So I'm sure you'll include some of the links, and a great newsletter where I highly curate the studies that I share.
And that's at your website?
It is.
Love that. Last question that gets asked to everybody on the show. What does it mean to you to live a genius life?
To be open to all information and aware and discerning of the relevance of that information and take action based on that.
Hey, if you like that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.
You're thinking about how they wake up in the morning, what they eat, how they move, what's their relationship to the people in their life, to their job, to their geography, to sunshine, to laughter, to sex. And I'm thinking about all of this. And it has features of functional medicine, root cause resolution rather than symptom suppression.